How's it going, guys? Chris here, and today we're going to be checking out all those creepy enemies in Little Nightmares. Despite seeming like a light-hearted game on the face of it, Little Nightmares is anything but light-hearted, basically following the dark journey of children imprisoned by twisted monsters, trying to escape a mysterious underwater vessel known as the Maw. Along with all the grotesque, monstrous entities on the prowl, there's also other dangers lurking in the bowels of the Maw. For starters, it's also infested with giant blood-sucking leeches, which typically hide away in the shadows, but can often be seen dangling down from pipes and beams along the ceiling. These slimy parasites choose to live in the dark, wet parts of the facility, being able to thrive in the Maw's damp environments. They don't get to feed very often, so to them you're basically a walking bag of soup, which the leeches are very eager to chow down on. These things are persistent buggers that'll stop at nothing to turn you into a Capri Sun, dropping down to chase you through the darkness, usually attempting to overwhelm you in their vast numbers. Thankfully, they're not very fast creatures, typically dragging themselves across the floor at a really dozy pace. But in shallow pools of water, they'll become a hell of a lot more lively, slithering their way around like mini water snakes, now being far more effective at hunting you down. Not all of the enemies you'll encounter in Little Nightmares are living beings, with one of them acting more like a security device, there to prevent any intruders from entering, and also to stop any detained children from escaping. The eyes are basically creepy surveillance systems which light up the area where they happen to be looking, but unlike that fancy Ring doorbell that you've got installed on your porch, these things are more than just cameras with bright spotlights built into them, with those beams of light actually able to petrify living things, and essentially turn them into stone. They're very effective at doing what they do, so you'll need to use any objects and shadows in the environment for cover, as they systematically scan the room for any movement. If you get spotted, prepare to become a statue. Otherwise, these obstacles can be avoided fairly easily by just timing your movements carefully. The first and arguably one of the most disturbing monsters you'll encounter in Little Nightmares is the Janitor, a humanoid entity with freakishly disproportionate limbs, and pasty skin that definitely needs some better care. So much so that it's even decided to slump down from the top of his head, with folds of flesh hanging over his eyes to render him blind and reveal his skull, though at least he's got the courtesy to try and cover that up with Indiana Jones's hat. The Janitor's got an evil grin permanently etched onto his creepy face, making this guy even more sinister, especially with him being the one who traps and guards the children imprisoned in the Maw, having the job of watching over them, but also preparing them to be sent to other parts of the facility, by wrapping them up and hanging them on a meat hook conveyor system. Where are they going, you might ask? Somewhere pretty unpleasant. It's safe to say that you'll probably end up suffering the same fate if the Janitor catches you. He's got a very acute sense of hearing, and any creaking floorboards or knocked objects will be more than enough to alert him of your presence. Those stubby legs might not win many races, but his long gangly arms are really good for snatching up any stray runaways, such as yourself. Being quiet certainly helps when you're around him, choosing to step on cushioned cloth on the floor, and generally sneak around at a snail's pace to avoid getting scooped up. With that said, sometimes you'll need to use sound to disguise your movements, and even lure him into certain areas, with him pretty much always responding to it, whether it was part of the plan or not. Probably the most mysterious enemy you'll face is one that you'll briefly encounter after escaping the clutches of the Janitor, in a big room full of discarded shoes where a hidden monster lurks underneath. If you dive into the big pile of shoes, something is going to come chasing after you. What does this thing look like? Nobody knows, hence why it's just known as the Shoe Monster. The one thing that we do know is that it's going to drag you down to the bottom if it manages to catch you. Probably not for any good reason. The briefcases scattered around sort of act like islands, which you can use to escape the creature and navigate around the room safely. Getting gobbled up by something that you can't see certainly makes this monster pretty unsettling, but the most disturbing thing about this room isn't the creature under the shoes, it's the sheer number of shoes and why they happen to be there in the first place. Let's just say that it's likely to be more of a dumping ground rather than a collection. The Maw's got quite a few loyal servants, all of which help to keep it running and functioning. Massive banquets of food must be prepared for its visitors, which is done so by a pair of twin chefs, who look just as grotesque as the meals they cook. They're obese monsters wearing fleshy masks to hide their real faces, giving them a pretty warped appearance as they shuffle around, attempting to prepare a feast for the guests. Where their ingredients come from is definitely questionable. A lot of the kids that the Janitor wraps up do get delivered near the kitchens after all, and we can safely assume that not all of the meat that they use is from animal origin. There's definitely some pretty dark crap going on here, and these guys aren't in the mood for being disrupted. They've got a very violent and brutal nature, more so than some of the other creatures in the Maw. and if you get caught up by one of the twins, you'll wind up becoming part of the feast too. Nothing like getting stuffed into a fish to really dampen your spirit. You've got to avoid sightlines at all costs by creeping around and hiding under the furniture. These guys might be chubby, but they're still going to outrun you, so you've got to be smart when moving around and try to get to areas where those podgy hands can't reach. Aside from being terrible at cooking, they're not exactly the most hygienic chefs in town either. If Gordon Ramsay knew what these guys did in the kitchen, he'd probably rock up with a film crew. But at least the twins do get the washing up done, so I guess things could technically be worse. The main reason why the chefs were preparing all that nasty raw food is to please all of the hungry guests that are about to come flooding into the moor. It's a bit of a mystery where they came from, but the reason why they decided to visit the underwater vessel is probably the same reason why a lot of people go on cruise ships, to hop on board and spend most of their time at the buffet. These guests are ravenous monsters that seem to be in a mad hurry to gorge on everything in sight, and this makes them grossly overweight, bloated and disfigured from the absolute shit ton of calories they're continuously ramming down their throats. The only thing that will distract them from all this binge eating is yourself, and surprise surprise, that's because they want to gobble you up too. In fact, a lot of them will do everything in their power to chase you down, even jumping off their seats and scrambling around on the floor, being very eager to put you on the menu too. Why you're such a high priority meal in particular isn't quite so clear. Maybe children are a delicacy in this universe, maybe you're just a lot fresher than the meat served from the kitchen, or just maybe it's because the other meat is a lot fattier and full of gristle. Wondering where all those discarded shoes came from, and all those massive slabs of ham that the chefs were hacking to pieces earlier? We can probably assume that these so-called guests are devouring other guests from previous visits, herded into the moor, fattened up like cattle, and then presumably slaughtered and used as produce, fed to the next batch of cannibalistic visitors to keep the cycle flowing. When I said that this game was a bit dark, I wasn't kidding. Of course, by venturing down into the depths of the moor, things aren't going to get any more pleasant. It's a dark, grimy place flooded with water, though there's plenty of evidence to suggest that this area could have been a living space in the past. It turns out that it's still inhabited by someone, and you're certainly not going to be alone down there. A water hag monster known as the Granny lurks beneath the murky pools. Being cut off from the rest of the moor, left behind to rot away, she's likely lost a lot of her sanity, making her deranged and extremely aggressive. This monster really plays on the fear of deep, dark bodies of water, and anyone who's ever had the thought of being dragged down into the pitch black void will probably find her a bit unnerving. She'll persistently stalk you under the surface, attempting to drown you at any given opportunity, so obviously swimming around is going to make you very vulnerable, and you'll therefore need to use furniture and floating debris to get around safely. She can't grab you above the water, but she can cause you to fall into it by knocking the solid objects that you stood on, or by even destroying them completely. You might also need to lure her away from areas by using discarded food thrown down garbage chutes, which won't be enough to get rid of the Granny for long, but should bide you enough time to get to the next object. Just don't hang around in the water for too long. Unlike most of the other enemies in Little Nightmares, our next one doesn't come in the form of a big twisted monster, but instead something a bit more supernatural. Shadow kids are like lost souls which haunt the pitch black spaces of the residence, being creepy childlike phantoms wearing white porcelain masks. These ghostly apparitions might not seem harmful at first, following you around and watching from a distance, but when the lights go out, so do the Shadow Kids, and they're not exactly going to play very nice, giving you a very good reason to fear the dark. Shadow Kids can't survive in bright lights, so you'll need to use that torch to vaporize these evil spirits before they manage to reach you. They can move fairly fast and surround your location, charging forwards in quick bursts to murder you in a pretty spooky way. Because they're essentially made up of black smoke, they can also be quite tricky to spot in the darkness, especially when they hide around corners and dash around to reposition, letting their mates get the drop on you as they pop out from behind the furniture. So probably the main antagonist of Little Nightmares is actually the one that looks the most normal. The lady is a tall, slender woman wearing a white porcelain mask, a bit like the ones that the Shadow Kids have. She's styled like a Japanese geisha, and plays a very important role in the grand scheme of things. Corrupted by vanity and empowered by her appearance, the lady is a mysterious character that seemingly distances herself from the moor's other monstrosities, possibly hiding behind that mask as a way to hide away from the fact that she's also a monster too. She's practically the moor's governess, essentially being its beating heart, having learned how to use supernatural magic, casting an eerie hypnotic spell to literally keep the place running. Those powers allow her to do all sorts of stuff from teleportation, levitation, and even turning captured kids into gnomes. But the most vital one is the ability to drain the life force from other living things, with that possibly being the source of these powers, charging her up like a battery. All those dumpy guests at the banquet will most likely be her victims, lured into the maw with the promise of food, only for their spent carcasses to become food themselves for the next wave of visitors. After the ladies leech the life out of them first, that is. The endless cycle repeats. But if anything jeopardizes this system, like say a few runaway kids, then that problem needs sorting out ASAP, which is why the lady is so adamant to stop you from causing any more disruption. Unlike most of the other enemies, you'll actually take her on in a final showdown, where you'll need to stand under a light and aim a mirror, which reflects back at the lady to cause damage. Maybe the mirror's repelling dark magic, or maybe it was something else. All we really know is that it's going to weaken the lady to eventually defeat her, leaving her vulnerable, allowing her powers to be passed on to a new successor. So that's it for this one, folks, but if you thought the monsters in this game were messed up, then you really want to check out the ones in Little Nightmares 2. The video for that should be up on the screen and on my channel as soon as it's available. Subscribe to see loads of other monsters and freaks from other games, and give us a big fat thumbs up if you enjoyed this one. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next.